Yeah.
The pike fishing this winter on our local river has been really great. Myself and my friend Ryan have done quite a few sessions, and although it started off with us catching quite a few small fish, the last couple of trips have produced some absolute monsters.
Oh my god!
Yeah, that's your 20, mate. That's your 20. This particular fish went 26 pounds and has got to be, well, it's definitely the biggest river pike I've ever seen in the flesh. Ryan was pretty buzzing about that, but this particular video is going to be about how you guys can go and catch big pike from rivers. I'm going to talk through the locations to find them in, and in particular a specific rig that we like to use when pike fishing on rivers. When pike fishing on rivers, I really like to start off with a lure. The reason I like to lure fish initially is because you can pack very light when lure fishing. You can literally have a net, your rucksack, one rod, and you can rove the river, cover a lot of ground, fish lots of different areas, make one cast to each good looking area and then keep on the move. This enables you to find where the pike like to be, and you'll quickly locate areas that potentially don't hold many fish and other areas that do. Once you've found that there's pike in a certain area of the river, potentially it's a nice slack or a deep hole where you often get a bite on the lure, you then might want to try and catch something bigger. Now, I'm not saying that lures don't catch big pike, but in general, we tend to find that we catch smaller, more active, aggressive pike on lures, but when we switch over to fishing bait, we catch the bigger, more lazy pike. Here you join me on one of the first of my good pike fishing sessions, fishing baits, fishing static, and trying to catch something that little bit bigger. Today we're fishing with bait, we're fishing it static, just on a spot, and I'm just going to leave these two rods out in the swim for as long as my patience can endure. Yes!
You got one! Oh. Oh no, it's not massive. Still nice though. Woo. That is fighting so hard for the size of the fish. We got a fish. So funny, it was just as I thought, nothing was going to happen. So weird.
Unhooking a pike can be tricky at first, so we'd suggest going with a friend or another angler who has experience with unhooking them. Alternatively, you can check out the video on our channel called How to Unhook a Pike. I'll put a link in the description to that video so you can learn exactly where to and where not to put your hands. There he is. My first and hopefully not only pike of today. Interesting difference in the colours between a fish like this, which lives most of its life in murky water, compared to the colours of the fish that live in the clear water of, you know, the chalk stream that I fished earlier on in the year.
So much paler, aren't they?
Yeah, much lighter in coloration. My hands are freezing now. Can I put it back?
Yes. Feel free.
It's horrible out here today. What are we doing?
I don't know, I can't.
We're catching pike, mate. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Well, catching a pike so far. Oh, it's so free. Mate, honestly, it must be one of the coldest days this year. When it comes to bait, we quite like mackerel dead bait. That works really well for us. They're quite tough, they stay on the hooks well, and they let out a lot of oils and scents into the water, which I'm sure attracts the pike. Another good alternative, particularly if your local river is full of roach, then give a roach a try. Quite a lot of anglers that we know use roach on our local river and do quite well on that. Alternatives in your local tackle shop, you'll see lampreys, smelt, sprats, all sorts. Those smaller baits have worked very well for us in the past, particularly if we fish them off the bottom, so they sort of wobble in the flow. If you're going to be using live baits, then just make sure you follow your local rules and regulations. Now I'm going to talk about the particular rig that we like to use when pike fishing on rivers. On a lake, you can just use your float and suspend your bait directly underneath it. No weight or any complications, you just chuck that out and it sits where you cast it. A little bit of drift might pull it off, of course might drift it around the lake, but on a river it's very different. If you want to keep a bait anchored in one particular area, you're going to have to use something called a Paternoster rig. Now the Paternoster rig includes your float up on the surface and a weight down on the bottom. This is normally a 1 to 3 or 4 ounce lead, depending on how much flow there is. It basically means that you can set your dead or live bait at any depth within the water column, and you can anchor it on the bottom and the flow won't, wash it downstream. To tie this rig, you'll need a few bits of kit, which you'll be able to find in any good tackle shop. Firstly, you'll need some main line. For pike, we like to use 30-pound braid as a minimum. This is to ensure that you never snap up on a fish, and if the hooks get snagged in something on the bottom, you can straighten them out and get your rig back. You'll also need some float stops, a pike float. The bigger and deeper the river, the bigger float you'll need for it to stay on the surface. Some lead-free carp fishing leader material, a couple of standard size 8 swivels, a rubber bead, a solid bag tail rubber or large anti-tangle sleeve, some pike trace material, 2 treble hooks, these are size 6s, some relatively light line, this is 6 pounds, and a lead. Your lead size depends on the depth and pace of the river. You'll need a lead large enough to hold the bottom. Finally, some forceps, scissors, wire cutters, and a splicing needle will also be needed to construct this rig. The first thing you'll need to do is make a trace. Cut off around 40 centimeters of wire trace material. Attach your first hook by passing the end of the trace material through the hook eye twice. Then clip on your forceps to the tag end and spin them around the wire. Providing you twist it tightly, this will hold stronger than any knot or crimp, and only requires the forceps that you have for pike fishing anyway. Trim the tag end and then take your second hook. Pass this onto the trace. Set the hooks apart so they will match up to the size of your bait. Then wrap the wire around the hook 6 or 7 times before passing it back through the hook eye and pulling tight. It's worth noting at this stage that we like to debarb most of our hooks, just leaving one barbed hook so that the bait doesn't fall off so easily. Having less barbed hooks makes unhooking so much easier and stops the hooks from getting caught up in your net so easily. Now slide on the anti-tangle sleeve or the solid bag tail rubber. The reason we like the solid bag tail rubbers is because they're very stiff and they kick the trace away from the main line. You'll see this in action later. At the end of the trace, attach the swivel in the same way you attached the first hook. Now we'll sort out the leader or up trace. We'll explain why this is so helpful once the rig is complete. Take off 60 centimeters or so of lead-free leader material and use your splicing needle to create a loop in one end. We have a full video on our channel about how to splice leader material in case you want to learn this in more detail. In the other end, begin to create a loop, but slip on the trace swivel and attach it to the leader. Now you have your trace with a leader above it. Slide down a rubber bead onto the leader so it sits up against the swivel. Next, take a length of lighter line and tie the end to your lead. For this we use a half blood knot. At the other end of this length of line, tie on a swivel. This will be your weak link. Now take the swivel and pass it over the leader so that now the setup looks like this. The rig is almost complete, so you'll need to pass a float stop onto your main line, followed by your float, and then another float stop. Finally, tie your main line to the top loop on your leader that you spliced earlier. For this we use a half blood knot. Pull everything really tight and make sure all your knots and swivels are solid. And that is the finished setup. Now if you imagine that this rig is out in the water and the float is set slightly over depth, the line between the lead and the float should be relatively tight. and therefore the trace is kicked out to the side. The lead will hold bottom, enabling you to fish static. The leader material ensures that a pike can't accidentally take the bait and the mainline in its mouth, potentially biting through your thinner mainline. This leader also protects the pike if it rolls on the line during the fight. The length of your weak link dictates how far off the bottom your bait is suspended. If you want your bait to be laying on the deck, say you're using a nice large mackerel and you just want it laying there on the bottom, then you just use a short, weak link. This ensures that your deadbait lays on the deck. However, if the bottom is very weedy, or there's loads of snags, or if you just want to use a live bait or a small deadbait and fish it mid-water, suspended off the bottom, all you need to do is use a longer weak link. This weak link is named as such because you tend to use a lighter line than what your main line is. This is because sometimes that lead on the end can get snagged in the bottom, and therefore when you pull, you don't want to snap off your hooks or your float or anything. You just want to snap that weak link and lose the lead, but not the rest of your setup. On this particular session, we were fishing a tidal stretch of river, which means that the depth is constantly changing. Every hour or so, I would just take the float and slide the float rubber up or down to adjust the depth. It's important when using the Paternoster rig that you try and get the depth relatively accurate to ensure that that line between the float and lead is tight, and that means you get quicker bite indication, and it also ensures that your deadbait or live bait is suspended up off the bottom if you need it to be. When it comes to where to actually cast this rig, we like to look for relatively deep water, often slack areas in the margins of the river. We often find that pike like to sit in areas where they don't have to constantly swim against the flow. So if you find a large fallen tree or a depth change which results in slack water, slower water, that's the sort of area where you want to try chucking out your bait for a pike. Once you see a bite, signalled by the float either bobbing a little bit or pulling right under, or potentially just drifting slowly off into the distance, you want to try and strike relatively quickly to ensure you get a good hook hold on the fish and it doesn't swallow your bait. We like to see the bite, grab the rod, just check the clutch, just make sure the drag's nice and tight, and then set the hook hard to pull the hooks out of the bait and into the pike's bony mouth.
How's it, Carl? Same size as the other one.
Yeah?
Well, hey! That's number 2.
What are you doing?
I just ate mud. Oh, I skipped breakfast this morning, so I thought I'd just eat some mud. Oh, my keys.
I don't even know what's going on.
Oh, mate, absolutely. So, were you recording?
Yeah, but I didn't quite. You just kind of fell out of shot. Wasn't sure what you did. You got a fish though. That's pretty cool.
Well, hey! Another one. It's getting really cold today. Proper Baltic conditions. My fingers are just freezing. But it's worth persevering when you can catch one like this. Well, catch 2 like this. They were peas in a pod. This one looks so similar to the last one I caught.
Yeah, that fish must be over 1 metre long.
Or getting on for that, yeah.
Oh, nice job.
Well, that was a pretty good morning session down the river. 2 decent sized pike. It's kind of hopeful of another one, but doesn't look like it's going to happen. Anyway, if you want to watch more videos about predator fishing, pike, perch, dead baiting, lure fishing, that sort of thing, there's a playlist on screen now full of our predator fishing tutorials. Hopefully they help you, and we'll see you soon.